Hi, I'm Maximilian Alvarez. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Real News Network and host of the podcast Working People. And this is the Art of Class War on Breaking Points. As Israel's genocidal assault on Gaza continues, and thousands of Palestinian civilians, including many children, are killed or buried under the rubble, a coalition of more than 30 Palestinian trade unions have issued an urgent call to labor organizations around the world to take action to force a ceasefire and to end Israel's occupation of Palestine, including engaging in direct actions to halt arms deliveries to the Israeli military. In the wake of the brutal Hamas-led attacks on October 7th that killed between 1,300 and 1,400 Israelis, the vast majority of them civilians, and with 200 Israelis kidnapped by Hamas still being held captive, Israel's far-right government, led by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have waged a scorched earth bombing campaign and ground invasion of Gaza, a 22 by 5 mile open-air prison where Palestinians have been held captive for decades and brutalized by Israel's U.S.-backed apartheid state. At least 8,796 people have been killed in Gaza since the beginning of Israel's retaliatory offensive, Gaza's health ministry said today, Wednesday, including 3,648 children. And that's to say nothing of the countless lives and futures and homes lost over 75 years of conflict resulting directly from Israel's violent occupation of Palestine and the maintenance of its apartheid system. Labor has a long and proud tradition of using worker power to fight against war, genocide, and apartheid around the globe. Let us not forget the heroic actions taken by members of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, or the ILWU, who protested apartheid in South Africa and even refused to unload South African cargo at ports here in the United States. And just this week, leaders of multiple transport workers' unions in Belgium called on their members to refuse to handle cargo containing military equipment being sent to Israel. And last week, over 100 members of the coalition Workers for a Free Palestine in the UK formed a human blockade in front of an arms factory in Kent owned by Instro Precision, a subsidiary of Elbit Systems, one of Israel's largest weapons manufacturers. But actions like these so far are more the exception than the rule. While the vast majority of unions in the United States are either staying silent or actively supporting Israel, rank-and-file workers are heeding the call from their fellow workers and unionists in Palestine and taking direct action. Ahead of the large-scale march on Washington, D.C. that will take place this Saturday, November 4th, and I'll be there covering the march for the Real News, a group of rank-and-file healthcare workers in New York under the group name Healthcare Workers for Palestine are currently preparing for an action that will take place on Friday, November 3rd. In a press release announcing the event, Healthcare Workers for Palestine stated, quote, "In a powerful display of solidarity, a collective of rank-and-file healthcare workers will come together in a rally against genocide in Gaza, followed by a vigil to mourn the loss of lives in Palestine. This will be a space for healthcare workers to voice their unwavering support for the people of Palestine and to demand an end to the Israeli military assault on Gaza and attacks in the West Bank. This action will also grieve the over 7,000 Palestinians, including over 50 medical workers, killed since October 7th. This rally, scheduled to take place on November 3rd at 6 p.m. at City Hall Park, will bring together nurses, physicians, psychologists, social workers, doulas, medical and nursing students, assistive personnel, and others from major institutions around the city. Healthcare workers will call for an immediate end to the bombings and of the genocide of Palestinians. The rally and vigil will include speeches, peaceful demonstration of solidarity with Palestinian healthcare workers, a moment to collectively mourn and honor our Palestinian colleagues who have died while serving their patients, a space for sharing of personal stories that highlight the impact of the conflict on healthcare workers and patients alike, and a call to action for healthcare workers around the world to join the fight in solidarity with Palestinians, end quote. To talk about all of this and more, I spoke with Allison, a nursing student in New York City, actively organizing with healthcare workers to take action for Palestine. Allison is a member of Healthcare Workers for Palestine and a writer and member of Left Voice. Here's our conversation, which we recorded earlier today, Wednesday, November 1st, from the Real News Studio in Baltimore. Well, Allison, thank you so much for joining us today on Breaking Points. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get right to it because there's a lot going on right now, and I know you've got a lot going on in preparation for this action that y'all are taking and that you are involved in the organizing of. So I wanted to, before we get to like the details of Friday's action, I wanted to kind of take a quick step back, right? Because you and other healthcare workers and other working people who are participating in this action, you know, you're workers just like the rest of us. I wanted to ask if you could tell us more about who you are and what you do, what working life, you know, is like for you and other healthcare workers right now. And then I want to ask if you could tell us about how and why you came to be an active fighter in the movement to stop Israel's occupation of Palestine and its genocidal destruction of Gaza. So talk us through how you and your fellow workers are fusing, you know, the power and principles of the labor movement to fight for a ceasefire and end the occupation and Israel's apartheid system.
Yeah, thank you. So, as you mentioned, I'm Allison. I'm a nursing student in New York City. I'm currently doing rotations in Brooklyn, but I've also been at hospitals in Manhattan and in Queens, and I'll be finishing up school in a couple of weeks. I'm also a member of Healthcare Workers for Palestine, and I'm a member and writer for Left Voice. So, right now, I'm in school full time, and I'm working a job. I'm transitioning from a previous career in education. I know that most of my classmates are hustling too. We're all working class. We're trying to become nurses because they're super needed right now. Obviously, during my rotations, I've already had a really real glimpse of that, of like the short staffing that I know I'm going to face throughout my career. Some days we don't sit down for 10 hours, and I'm just assisting those who are more directly responsible for patient care. So their days are even heavier when they're directly responsible for patient care. And conditions, as so many people know, are really hard for nurses and doctors in the United States. But I and so many other healthcare workers have been both moved and really horrified at the ongoing genocide in Palestine. And in particular, as we've seen the bombings of healthcare facilities, cutting off supplies, like a total siege, all while healthcare workers are staying in their hospitals and refusing to evacuate despite facing possible death. So there's definitely some incredibly real heroism that we're seeing within Palestinian healthcare workers, but also the brutality of genocide by Israel is moving a lot of us to action. So in terms of what you were asking about coming into this fight, in New York City, there's a network of healthcare workers who've been organizing to deal with the precarious healthcare system in the United States more generally. And this network, it grew during the pandemic, and then even more during the Black Lives Matter movement, connecting all types of healthcare workers around the city. And then in my case, specifically about 2 years ago during the attacks on Sheikh Jarrah, when there was an uptick in the movement for Palestine, together with many other nurses and healthcare workers, we organized contingents and protests and rallies apologies. And then currently, New York City Healthcare Workers for Palestine, this group formed out of a national statement that was put out. It has over about 4,000 signatories at the moment, and then groups in different cities or around the country are forming ad hoc chapters in order to engage healthcare workers around the country to join to fight to end the genocide in Palestine. And then in regards to your question about how to fuse like the power and principles of the labor movement. Recently, there was a statement by Palestinian trade unions that really helped answer this question a lot for us in a way. And in their statement, they remarked that only a mass movement is going to stop the killings. So I'm going to read what they wrote. Palestinian trade unions call on our counterparts internationally and all people of conscience to end all forms of complicity with Israel's crimes, most urgently halting the arms trade with Israel, as well as all funding and military research. And we've already been seeing that happen, and it's been really, really inspiring, especially to me in particular and to other healthcare workers. In Italy and in Belgium, unions have already stood up and said that they are not going to transport weapons to Israel anymore. And that's obviously really huge, and that is actively the power of the working class, like in action. And then more recently, workers in Palestine also put out a direct call to healthcare workers specifically to stand up in solidarity. And they said, and again, I'll read, medical workers, your voice within your union can make a difference. Demand that your union take a stand in support of medical workers in Gaza. Solidarity has no borders. So that really points the way forward for us. As I mentioned earlier, we as healthcare workers need to unite as workers to stand with Palestinian healthcare workers and with Palestine more broadly. And that's even more important for us as workers in the United States to do, since this genocide is obviously directly enabled and funded by the United States. It uses Israel as its imperialist proxy in the Middle East to control the region. That's pretty obvious and well known. And it makes it all that much more important for healthcare workers who take oaths to do no harm and to provide patient care to stand on the side of Palestinians at this time. And so kind of just to close up what you were asking, I think that healthcare workers can and need to play a role in building a mass movement needed to stop the violence. And knowing this, we can definitely highlight in our workplaces and organizations the need to stop U.S. aid to Israel, pointing out how there's no money for hospitals that are broken down. And I've even seen this in my own workplace, like the floors are peeling, I've seen rodents, and yet there's always infinite money for war. And that's true whether it's the Democrats or the Republicans in office. This is money that's going to like military contracts and arms manufacturers, killing people, driving us towards like climate collapse, money that should be going towards healthcare, schools, housing, everything, social services. If healthcare workers in our unions remotely claim to support health and justice, it's clear what stance needs to be taken today, and that is to stand with Palestine against bombings, against aid to Israel, and an end to the occupation, and for a free Palestine. So ad hoc healthcare workers groups around the country should definitely play a role, but our unions really need to stand up with this message as well.
Well, I think there's something really, I mean, there are many important things in what you just said, but one of the things that just really struck me because, I mean, we're recording this on Wednesday, November 1st. The action that we're going to talk about in a second is coming up on Friday. So we're going to try to turn this around very quickly. But earlier today on the Real News Network, on our biweekly Worker Solidarity live stream, I hosted a conversation with two fellow workers and union members in the United Kingdom who also felt, like they read that call from the Palestinian trade unions calling on their fellow workers around the globe to engage in direct action and be part of the movement to stop the war on Gaza, the end the occupation, and all of that important stuff. And it was incredible listening to these guys who, we've been covering the strikes in the UK for the past year and a half. Working people are facing a cost of living crisis. Their pay has been going down, all while corporations and shareholders are raking in record profits. Like, this is the sort of working class struggle that we've been covering here on Breaking Points in the Art of Class War since I started doing this segment. We cover it every week at the Real News. And I mentioned that just because, like, when we look at the media, especially here in the US, but even there in the UK, the way that pundits and even, politicians all the way up to the Biden White House, they talk about the people who are engaging in these actions, people who are taking to the streets and saying, like, no to this war, no to this genocide, and demanding an end to the occupation and demanding a solution that allows people to actually live as equals in peace on this land. Like the media talks about all those people as if they're like just activists who appear out of nowhere, not regular working people who are also like working day in, day out to put food on the table, to pay rent. The workers that we talk to every week here, like healthcare workers like yourself, they're facing just untenable nurse to patient ratios, more work piled onto fewer workers, all while your pay stagnates and good healthcare workers are leaving the industry. Like I hear this from so many healthcare workers, and I don't think our country understands the crisis that we are in, that was only exacerbated 10 times by COVID. But like, we don't have a plan for replacing all of these healthcare workers that we've been losing for the past 3 to 4 years. And it terrifies me. But I only mention that to say is like, the people who are engaging in these actions, expressing solidarity with Palestine, demanding a ceasefire and an end to the occupation, even folks who are also, mourning the loss of the 1,400 Israelis who were killed on October 7th. Like, no one wants to see any of these people die, and they want to do something. And so but it's regular working people who are doing that. And I think that like, there's just a really interesting connection that you were drawing there about how you could even feel a sense of, I think we all feel a basic human solidarity. No one wants to see children, civilians, anyone die in the way that they are dying by the thousands over in Gaza right now. So no one wants to see that from a basic human level, I hope. But also, like, from a working class perspective, like, even as a healthcare worker here in the richest country in the world, working in hospitals that are falling apart for pay that can't keep a roof over your head, like, there is a sense of class solidarity with the doctors we're seeing in these hospitals that are being bombed, that are having to shut down because Israel's not allowing fuel to come into the country. Like, I guess I just wanted to ask you if you could say more about that, like about the sort of class solidarity that you and your fellow healthcare workers are feeling towards other healthcare workers, other working people in Palestine right now.
Yeah. So as we know, the working class has no borders. The exploitation and oppression that workers face in the United States is the same sort of exploitation and oppression that workers face all around the world, although obviously it's incredibly exacerbated by the ongoing genocide that workers in Gaza are currently experiencing. But that just means that we know that our borders don't stop at the United States. Our borders are global, and that we need to stand in solidarity with workers across the world.
Yeah, I'd recommend that folks go back to the Real News Network and watch a documentary report we published earlier this year of Palestinian workers passing through an Israeli checkpoint to get to work every day. And they have to wait for an hour through this it looks like a scene out of Children of Men. Like, these are just regular workers who have to spend an hour at 3 a.m. every day just to get to work. It's just, it's a really important report, and I would recommend people watch it. But anyway, I know we don't have a whole lot of time, and I want to make sure that we talk about healthcare workers for Palestine and the action coming up this Friday. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how healthcare workers for Palestine came together and about the action on Friday. Like, what do people watching need to know about the event, why you're doing it, and how they can get involved?
As I was mentioning, the group itself formed really recently following the beginning of the siege on Gaza, out of a shared call by healthcare workers to end the genocide. There are, like I also mentioned, over 4,000 signers right now. I think there's about 12 or 13 groupings around the country, possibly even more at this point, that are trying to organize more regionally. So in New York, we have doctors, nurses, med students, like nursing students like me, social workers, birth workers, doulas, many others involved in the New York City chapter of Healthcare Workers for Palestine. Some are socialists like me. Some are really new to politics. Some folks have family in Palestine. Some folks are anti-Zionist Jewish folks. So it's a very diverse grouping of people, of healthcare workers specifically. And then the action on Friday will be held at City Hall Park in Lower Manhattan, and will be a rally and vigil to mourn the more than 8,600 Palestinians killed in Gaza as of now, with of course, tens of thousands more who have been injured. And additionally, we'll recognize the specific atrocities against healthcare workers in Gaza. There's 124 healthcare workers who've been killed, 25 ambulances destroyed, 75 healthcare institutions targeted, including 12 hospitals and 32 primary care centers. So as healthcare workers and professionals dedicated to promoting the health and well-being of all of our patients, we understand like the immense gravity of performing patient care in overcrowded and hospitals without the necessary life-saving fuel, supplies, medicine, equipment, everything like that. Currently in Gaza, hospitals are being bombed or shuttered for lack of supplies and fuel. Patients are undergoing C-sections or amputations without anesthesia. People are being forced to drink contaminated water, like exacerbating the health crisis. There aren't enough ventilators for patients who need life support, incubators for newborns. Patients on dialysis are condemned to die when their hospitals finally can no longer provide this service. And yet, in the face of all of that, healthcare workers are refusing to leave their patients and evacuate, even with the threat of death by Israeli bombings. So first and foremost, we organize this rally to unequivocally give our support and solidarity with Palestine, especially our healthcare colleagues. And we also want to put forward specific calls, which include an immediate end to the military assault, access to medical care in Gaza, an end to the 75-year apartheid state, no more U.S. aid to Israel, free healthcare for all, and no institutional retaliation for support of Palestine. And then for people who are interested in getting involved, they should definitely come to the rally on Friday, especially healthcare workers. They should be encouraged to wear scrubs to show that they work in healthcare. And we want folks to invite their coworkers to make the event as big as possible, but it's open to the public. And then we'll have opportunities to get involved beyond the rally and vigil, which will be shared at the action.
You know, you mentioned the threat of retaliation, right? And this is something we cover a lot here on the Art of Class War on my podcast, Working People at The Real News. We largely talk about it in the context of retaliation against workers for engaging in concerted protected activities, i.e. organizing in the workplace. But this is a very real concern right now. And this is where I want to end, because I know I got to let you go in a second. There is a heavy McCarthyite chill that I think is settled over the country right now. We are seeing a struggle, that's for sure. Workers like yourself taking to the street, even at great risk to your job. And, I've seen and talked to people in Canada who have just had their photos plastered on social media and have gotten fired just for showing up at a rally. They didn't even speak. And sadly, a lot of organized labor in this country is either cowardly remaining silent, giving out wishy-washy statements that don't really mean anything, like we lament this, we lament that, we hope that peace is in the future, but not really taking a stance. And I mean, like the Starbucks Workers United folks probably put out the strongest statement from a union, and they don't even have a contract with any of the Starbucks stores that have unionized. And so what are the larger, more established unions doing? Well, like I said, they're either not saying anything or they are openly expressing continued and endless support for Israel, like the AFT. And, it's really rank and filers who are kind of taking that step to say what the official unions won't. And hell, even folks that I've interviewed before on my show, like the great, brilliant labor organizer Cooper Caraway, who was recently employed by SEIU, that's the Service Employees International Union in Connecticut. He was fired for speaking at a rally, I think on October 9th, speaking out in support of Palestinians and calling for an end to the occupation. He's now fired, right? So this is what's happening to folks who are taking that step, and there is a very real and credible fear that folks are going to face retaliation for saying anything right now, regardless of the genocidal violence that we are watching unfold before our very eyes. And so I wanted to just ask, for folks out there who are watching and listening, who are seeing you and hearing about this struggle, who are maybe seeing and hearing about the Belgian unions that you mentioned and that I mentioned in the intro, who have encouraged their members to not unload any cargo carrying weapons for Israel, just like port workers and ILWU members here in the States did to protest South African apartheid. There's a long history in labor resisting genocide, apartheid, around the world. And y'all are participating in that tradition. But for folks who are watching and listening to this who are maybe too scared to do that, or maybe worried about what it can mean, I guess I just wanted to ask, like, what you would say to folks here in the US and Canada about why they should get involved in this fight, and why we as workers need to get involved and do whatever we can to stop this madness.
So, as you said, there's been a huge crackdown on pro-Palestinian voices. Workers fired, like you mentioned, or reprimanded. I've seen conferences getting abruptly canceled, media appearances being suppressed, and then, like you kind of mentioned, there's just been this overall witch hunt for those in support of Palestine. And there's also like this very real effort to paint those who stand against the state of Israel's genocidal policies as anti-Semitic. But as we know, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and we should stand against any and all forms of anti-Semitism. And we even saw that very clearly stated by recent movements with like Jewish Voice for Peace at Congress, and when they shut down Grand Central in New York City. But it's been incredibly inspiring to see that all over the world, people are rising up anyway, in spite of this very real fear, in solidarity with Palestine. And healthcare workers definitely have a role to play in that. Healthcare workers are some of the most trusted professionals in the United States. And that only increased after the pandemic, where healthcare workers were very much on the front lines. So that puts us in a really important and strong position to take a stand and speak in support of Palestine. But we have to do it together. We have to be part of standing for Palestine and surrounding the movement with solidarity, defending the right to speak and protest, and stopping any criminalization of the protests more broadly. And it's really important to organize our unions to take a stand as well. So many folks have been talking about, like you kind of mentioned, with regards to the Starbucks Workers United, about class struggle unionism, social justice unionism. In the past few years, we're seeing a resurgence of that within the labor movement. Like the UAW strike that just won some major gains, the Starbucks workers, like you mentioned, and then like even healthcare workers that brought Kaiser Permanente workers to strike. So our unions can't just stand for bread and butter demands. We know that. We can't just stand for workers in the United States. Like I said, it's workers around the world. We are all one class. We have to be clear that workers all over the world are connected, and it's a capitalist system. We're all connected. We stand against injustice everywhere and for oppressed people everywhere. So most union leaderships, though, they have very clear ties to the Democratic Party, but obviously, we know they're busy demonizing the protests, talking out in opposition to the protests, funding the wars. There was bipartisan support for the recent statement against students organizing for Palestine. So this is also a fight to build a more rank and file power, and building power independent of the Democrats in our unions. Right now, it's super, super urgent for unions to take a stand. Like Palestinian workers are calling on our unions to take a stand. And only mass action is going to actually stop the genocide that we're witnessing right now. So protests, but also it means the working class needs to stand up. The biggest organizations of the working class are still unions. So our unions need to take a stand on the side of the global working class. And healthcare worker unions in the United States have to stand with healthcare workers in Palestine. Our collective strength as workers is incredibly strong, and all over the world, it's even stronger. So we are the ones who can end the genocide and fight for an end to the occupation and for free Palestine.
So that is Allison from Healthcare Workers for Palestine in New York. Allison, thank you so much for joining us today on Breaking Points. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching this segment with Breaking Points, and be sure to subscribe to my news outlet, The Real News, with links in the description of this video. See you soon for the next edition of The Art of Class War. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. Solidarity forever.
Hey guys, if you like that video, go to breakingpoints.com, become a premium subscriber, and help us build the best independent media organization on the planet.
That's right. We're subscriber funded. We're building something new. We want to replace these failing mainstream media organizations.
So again, to subscribe, it's breakingpoints.com.